YouTube. Redcoat's Return here. This is number 2 video on filters and ways to filter your pipe with some supplementary information just to complete the entire picture. So I will leave a link to my original video which covers a lot of the available filter methods and filter types out there, and my impressions at least of how they work and how well they work. But here are some things that I partially have mentioned in that first video but didn't have experience with or didn't have examples of, and now I can show you. So I mentioned in the first video there are some nice methods to take moisture out of the smoke in the bowl by using things like these shallow filter pads, which are basically calcium sulfate, like plaster of Paris type of chalk, really. They're sort of used in school chalk. And you put those at the bottom of the bowl and they'll absorb moisture. They do colour a little bit, take a little bit of tar, but not much. It's mostly trying to give you a dry smoke. And I mentioned also there are alternatives like Nordic Stones. So I've invested in a tin of these and even a larger bag. So you can get them in these larger bag quantities. And of course, it's a lot cheaper per smoke if you buy in this kind of quantity than in the tin. So a lot of filters cost somewhere between maybe 10, 15, 20 cents, depending if you buy a very small pack or tin, or if you buy a larger bag. But you can certainly get them around 5 to 10 cents a smoke if you buy larger quantities. So it doesn't have to be getting that much more expensive on the cost of pipe smoking and the cost of drying or filtering your smoke. Now I have compared these and used these, and these are also, I think, equally good to the shallow filter pads. The good thing here is this sits in the bottom of the bowl. You tip it out with the ash and you could use it a second time. Probably I wouldn't use it more than that. So you maybe get a bit more use. They're somewhat larger in their capacity to dry. But I have used these Nordic Stones. These are made of clay. So these are dry and fired clay, which is very porous and does help to absorb the moisture. And I think they work equally well. If you put 3, 4, 5 of those in the bottom of the bowl, they work very well. So just to mention, that's an alternative to these shallow filter pads if you want to use those. Now I also mentioned in the last video these chaps here, Denne crystals. These are quite well known, and they basically come in these rather nice colourless types of crystals. You put 3 or 4 of those at the bottom of your bowl, and they also, I think, work very, very well as the others. There are different basis of drying. This is more a kind of silicate type of crystal, but I find that they work just as well. What I found is also, and I mentioned that in the last video, you could not only put some in the bowl here and then your tobacco on top and then smoke it. You could, in some cases, if there's room, put them on the inside of the bottom of the bowl here. And this case is, for example, a Peterson system type of pipe. This is actually one from Norfolk smoking pipes. That will be the topic of my next video. And he's rather cleverly used, and I think you can, if I get the light right here, you can see the vent hole for the smoke at the top I'll just try to get a bit more light. You see, there's the hole, but below there is a kind of spittle, if you like, drill shaft, and that basically allows moisture to collect there, and you can put a few crystals down there, and that's an alternative effective way to take the moisture out of the smoke. And that's a topic because I have been trying with some other alternatives, and I mentioned last time these Mascotti cigarette filters, and they were in 6mm, and you can try those with cobs, but I found them not that effective. They're rather short and small, and they quite easily overload, and it's all a bit fiddly. So I did give one try for these 8mm ones because they have a charcoal layer in the filter, and I've been curious as I am, I've opened up one of those filters, and you see they are the same wood charcoal, sort of pencil lead looking charcoal pieces that you find also in a lot of the filter cartridges for 9mm. So I actually tried one of these in a pipe, and here's the result. But being small, I knew it would overload with moisture, so I did put a few of those Denne crystals in. You could either put them in the bowl. In this case, I put them into the shaft here where this spittle well was, to absorb the moisture, and they do colour up a bit and take a little bit of tar with it. Now it's 8mm, so it means that's too loose a fit, but what I found is you can snips these at the edges, you see, and open them up a little bit, and if you do that on both sides without going too far that you let the charcoal out, they will fit quite snugly, but you have to fiddle with them a bit, and of course that's not optimal, that you have, you see they sit fairly tightly in there, that you have to fiddle with it a bit. So it did work. This experiment is another one of my famous experiments, but it did work. It was a cool smoke. These did get quite wet. I think the charcoal did take some tar, these crystals too, but if you use them alone, I don't think it's quite going to be enough in a 9mm with a full bowl of tobacco. And the fact you have to then give it a help with either Denne or the Nordic Stones or the Sharrow Filt Pad, whatever, you could then well ask you what's the point of having this in addition. So I kind of have given up trying to use cigarette filters to, if you like, be an alternative. They are very cheap. I mean, these work out at probably only about a cent per filter. So if you do your calculations carefully and you're really on a budget, you might think it could be worth to try these out. And there are some other ways you could maybe try and make them fit better by wrapping a piece of paper around them or something like that. Anyway, I personally won't be revisiting that alternative. I did mention in the last video there are other 9mm charcoal, active charcoal filters, and I since have got a few of those in small packs. One was the Big Ben, and one were the Blitz filters, these ones here. Interestingly, they both have exactly the same cap design, which of course begs the idea, and perhaps the reality. It's exactly the same cap design, which is very different to any of the others, like for example Stanwell or the Vaughan filters. that these are made by maybe the same company. Now, I don't know if Big Ben makes them for Blitz or Blitz makes them for Big Ben, but wouldn't surprise me. And I have used both of these filters. I find them, it's a very similar effectiveness and quality of smoke as you would have with, let's say, the Dr. Pearl Vauen filter or the Stanwell one. There's not a huge amount of difference between these active charcoal filters. Slightly, I still favour the Stanwell filter myself because of the draw. I think it's a very personal thing. You'll have to try it yourself and see what you think the draw is as you go through the smoke. What you see the flavour penalty is, I would estimate maybe 20% of the flavour is lost or at least modified by having active charcoal filters, but it does take the edge off and it does take a lot of the tars out and probably some of the nasties in the smoke. So I think everyone has to make their own experience. I mentioned in the last video White Elephant have come up with some so-called super flow filters, which are basically look like the standard White Elephant active charcoal filter but have a better draw, and I think maybe using a different quality of charcoal. Mentioned in the last video, there are some natural woody or the fiber sources which you can roast and turn into charcoal, which have much larger surface areas. For example, coconut hair charcoal filters from Paritza for 6mm pipes. And I'm not sure if maybe White Elephant is using a different source for their carbon. The particles do look a different shape than these sort of pencil lead ones, and they may have been made by a different process. Now, in the last video, what I hadn't shown you was this Super Mix White Elephant filter, and this is basically active charcoal with meerschaum put into it. And again, I've done a post-mortem on a used filter and taken out the charcoal to try and estimate, well, what kind of mix is it? And actually, it's more like a 15% or not more than 20% meerschaum in it. It seems to be much more active charcoal than meerschaum. You see in this one that the little white points are not that many. Now, I assume that White Elephant researched that and did all kinds of different ratios and found that's giving them best performance. When I smoked these filters, I got a very nice, cool, dry smoke with a very good draw. And I think maybe the meerschaum does help you to get a better airflow and might maybe help with the moisture absorption a bit. I would have expected to see a bit more meerschaum in there. I did look up the costs of meerschaum and active charcoal and make comparisons, but they're not really that different in cost as far as I know. So I don't think they've just tried to put less of the more expensive element in this mix. I think they've probably tried to optimize it according to whatever tests that they've done. It was very good. Is it worth? They're a little bit more expensive than the regular filters, depending again on the size you buy. I'm quite happy still with White Elephant active charcoal or White Elephant meerschaum filled 9mm filters, as I showed in the first video. If you're someone who just wants to have the maximum flavour, you'll go for 9mm meerschaum filled filters, because really you definitely get more taste coming through with that solution. If you want to hedge a bit and have something to absorb the tars, you might go for this Superflow mix, which is half and half. And if you really don't mind the taste being if you like, reduced a bit by the active charcoal, you might just go for the regular White Elephant or Stanwell or Big Ben or Blitz active charcoal filter. So that's what I learned there. And the last point I would like to bring in this addendum or this supplementary is I found these other Dr. Pearl filters called Größe 1, which means size 1. And it's probably an older type of filter. And it's basically a cigarette filter with a hole drilled through it. You see it there. With a paper wrap around the outside, and you can actually push out that cigarette type filter like that. And I have smoked a few of these, and they sort of look like this. So yes, a bit of tar and stuff does get sort of soaked up in the first part of the filter. Not maybe a huge amount, and it's probably certainly not as effective as active charcoal, but a lot of material to absorb moisture, and they do absorb the moisture very well. I did find in the latter part of the draw, using a big bowl of tobacco, that the draw seemed to get a little bit worse. Now that might be because this is swelling up as the moisture gets into it. It wasn't dramatic. It was just seemed to be a little bit harder draw. I think you have to make, again, your own experience if you want to try these and experiment with them, what you think about them. Definitely a bit more flavour going through. There's no active charcoal there, so it's a moisture control alternative. They're a little harder to find, these Dr. Pearl Größe number 1, you know, in 1 or 2 German websites. I'll put a link down there. I did find them. I actually got one of these with my pipe from Greece that I got recently, so maybe they're more commonly used there. But it's one alternative if you, again, are very flavour sensitive, want to have the maximum amount of flavour, but you want a convenient finished 9mm filter system, and perhaps you might prefer this to then using the Meerschaum, for example. Gives you an alternative. Okay, that's this little video. I hope that helps some of you who are looking and thinking about what to do for filter options, and please do look at this in the context of the first video I did, because there I address a lot of the other established filter methods for 9mm and 6mm, which are used commonly. Okay, so thanks very much, and you have a good day, everybody, and take care.